What happens when a familiar face from your past suddenly reappears, just as you think your life is finally settled? Saaya and her husband arrive in their hometown for what is meant to be a short, uncomplicated visit. No grand expectations, no hidden agendas. Just a few days to reconnect with familiar streets, familiar faces, and a slower rhythm of life that once shaped who she was. Everything feels comfortably distant. The town looks smaller than Saaya remembers. The roads narrower, the houses closer together, as if time has gently folded everything inward. This trip, she tells herself, is simply a pause, nothing more than a brief return before moving forward again. But familiarity has a way of surprising us. Saaya unexpectedly notices someone she hasn't thought about in years. An old neighbor. Not a stranger, not quite a close friend either, just someone who belongs unmistakably to her past. His presence is subtle, almost unremarkable to anyone else. But for Saaya, it feels like a quiet interruption, as if an old photograph has slipped out of a forgotten book. The encounter is brief, polite, ordinary, yet something about it leaves Saaya slightly unsettled. Not because of unresolved feelings, but because memory can be powerful when it arrives uninvited. He greets her warmly, and his tone carries an ease that only comes from shared history. He mentions small details, how the street hasn't changed, how the evenings still feel the same. Nothing inappropriate, nothing emotional, just words that quietly reopen a chapter she hasn't visited in a long time. Saaya finds herself smiling politely, listening more than she speaks. Nostalgia has a strange effect. It doesn't ask permission. It simply appears, carrying images of simpler days, youthful routines, and moments that once felt important, but were never meant to last forever. The familiarity makes her shy, reserved, not uncomfortable, but cautious. She becomes more aware of her posture, her tone, her boundaries. She recognizes what's happening inside her. This isn't longing. It isn't regret. It's memory doing what memory does best, reminding her of who she once was, without challenging who she has become. And that distinction matters. Saaya understands that emotions don't always signal desire. Sometimes they signal growth, showing us how far we've traveled from our earlier selves. Throughout the day, small moments continue to echo this feeling, passing familiar places, hearing names she hasn't heard in years. Each one brings a flicker of recognition, followed by calm acceptance. She doesn't dwell on them. She doesn't push them away either. She allows them to exist briefly and lets them pass, like scenery outside a moving car. By the time evening settles in, Saaya feels steady again. Sitting beside her husband, she listens to his quiet observations about the town, the people, the changes. She realizes something important. Returning home doesn't mean returning to the past. It means observing it from a new perspective, one shaped by maturity, clarity, and intention. The following morning arrives without urgency. Sunlight filters through thin curtains, and the town wakes at a pace that feels almost unfamiliar to Saaya now. There is no rush here, no crowded schedules, no constant noise. It is the kind of quiet that invites reflection, whether one asks for it or not. She notices how easily the past blends into the present when time slows down. That day, Saaya encounters the neighbor again, this time by chance rather than surprise. The interaction remains simple and respectful, yet it carries a gentle sense of familiarity that lingers longer than words. He mentions moments from years ago, not with emotion, but with an almost casual fondness, as if recalling a shared season rather than a specific connection. For Saaya, his familiarity triggers a subtle internal response. She becomes aware of how memory can resurface quietly, without drama or intensity. It doesn't demand attention, but it does invite awareness. She listens politely, nodding, offering brief replies. Each mention of the past feels like a soft tap on a closed door, not an attempt to reopen it, but a reminder that it once existed. She notices a brief sense of distraction, not confusion, but a natural human reaction to recognition. Memory, after all, is not selective. It brings back moments both significant and ordinary, often without context or intention. Yet Saaya does not allow herself to drift into comparison or speculation. She grounds herself in the present, aware of the life she has built and the values that guide her. She realizes that maturity is not about suppressing emotion or pretending the past never happened. It is about understanding what those emotions mean and what they do not. Nostalgia, she understands, is not a signal to return, but an opportunity to acknowledge growth. It shows us the distance we've traveled, not the direction we need to go back to. The neighbor's words continue to echo lightly in her mind, but they lose their weight as context settles in. These memories are no longer active parts of her identity. They are chapters already read, lessons already absorbed. Saaya recognizes that her sense of self is no longer shaped by who she once was in this town, but by the choices she continues to make each day. The sense of distraction fades completely. In its place is clarity, quiet, steady, and reassuring. Saaya returns to her hometown, feeling grateful rather than conflicted. Familiar places and brief encounters no longer pull her backward. They simply remind her how much she has grown. Memories surface quietly, but they no longer guide her choices. She understands that feeling does not require action, and remembering does not mean returning. The past shaped her, but it no longer defines her. Her strength lies in choosing her present with intention. This story reminds us that growth isn't about denying our past, but about knowing when to let it stay there. Real strength is choosing clarity, respect, and the life you are building today.